Good evening, everyone. It's Gavin Syme here, and let's talk about guns. The right to arm and protect yourself. That's a human right. Now, governments seem to, throughout history, have disagreed with this. I've done a lot of gun rights activism over the years. Even though I guess I wouldn't describe myself as a gun nut, I've always been a staunch advocate of gun rights, just as I am for speech rights and immigrant rights and everything else, because that is freedom. But what's going on with gun rights in the USA? You know, we see all these articles. There's been a lot of articles lately saying, oh, there's some 300 million Americans have guns, and it's more than the military, and they're trying to take our guns. And I think, well, wait a minute. If all these Americans have guns, why is our government the most fascist, controlling, abusive that it's ever been in the entire history? Why is it that the prisons are overflowing with people who have been charged for exercising their gun rights? The guns are being used in the USA for ego, not for freedom. Now, here's the thing. When you see these politicians and they take the shootings and they go out there and they say, oh, AR-15s, people who don't even know what guns are and haven't even ever shot a gun come out and they say, well, these should be banned. They shoot way too fast. I recently watched a video from another Facebooker, and it was a bit faction partisan based, but he did correctly state something important, and that's that more people die in the USA from fists than from long guns. And so as these massacres, some of which are dubious at best, come down the pipes and they try to take our guns, there's a few patterns you need to notice. The first is that both parties are trying to take your guns. The Democrats are taking your guns, the Republicans are taking your guns. The NRA is peddling off your gun rights for money and profit and donations, and they absolutely don't support your gun right. There's no such thing in the USA as an illegal gun. There's no such thing really anywhere, because the Constitution didn't grant you the gun right. The right to protect your family was inherent. It was natural. It was God-given, however you prefer to lay it out. People like the NRA come and they say, well, we're for gun rights as long as you obey, as long as you have the permits, as long as you're not a felon, which has become a completely arbitrary and meaningless term in the USA. And so the patriots, they come charging down the road with their blue line flags and their don't tread on me flags and their America flags. And they say, well, we're patriots because we're for gun rights. But here's the thing. The reason the government's trying to take away the guns is not because of those 300 million or whatever it is. That's all those millions of people flag waving, gun toting patriots. No, the government's not really afraid of those. Those people said a long time ago that they would obey, that they would give up their guns whenever the government said. Those people said a long time ago that we're just hobbyists and it fuels our ego to have all of these guns. Those patriots said a long time ago when they allowed the Wacos and the Ruby Ridges and the Bundy Ranches and the prisons to be filled with everybody from the black to the native to the rancher. Those patriots that back the blue, the very people taking their guns. Those patriots, you should obey, otherwise you go to prison. Those patriots, the government's not afraid of those because they're already the loyalists. Those are the patriots. And unfortunately, that's what most of the gun owners are. The reason the government wants to ban the guns is for fear and for new laws so they can keep those for-profit prisons going. But there's a more nefarious scheme. There's a younger generation, there's a newer generation that's waking up to the fact that the police are the number one terrorists in the USA. That's waking up to the fact that our nation is a fascist nation and has no freedom. That's waking up to the fact that whether it's Obama or Donald Trump stealing your guns, both are engaged in it. The police are the ones taking our guns. They're the ones putting us in prison. They're the ones killing us on the side of the road. There's a new generation that's saying, we're sick of the fascism. That's the generation that sometimes goes a little too far and sometimes gets a little fiery. That's the generation that the gun-owning generation who backs the blue says should be in prison because they don't obey the police. That's the generation that the government's afraid of. A generation who's realizing that the government's actually the enemy instead of stockpiling their guns and pretending that they're going to save the world from an invasion of Mexicans or Muslims, when in reality their country has already been overtaken by traitors and the most aggressive and violent fascists that the USA has ever seen as they stand on the sidelines waving an AR-15. Those aren't the people the government fears. Are you a person the government fears? The government should fear you. Not because you're dishonorable, not because you're violent. The government should fear you because your words are powerful, because your courage and your confidence are bold, because you love your neighbor, and because you refuse to live as a slave. Now, what about Mako? I had to leave for Mako to stay out of a U.S. concentration camp, and people say, well, there's no gun rights in Mako. And you know what? Governments have the same tactic. The government actually does fear the people down here, and that's why they've tried to restrict guns. But you know what? Guns are not illegal in Mako. Guns are restricted. But the rules, the human rights, the ability to protect your family is the same everywhere. Here's the key difference that people do not grasp. The reality is in the USA, you have the ability to buy a gun, but you have no gun rights. And if you so much as touch a gun in the presence of a government official that doesn't like it, or God forbid, actually pull a gun to defend people from the government, you will be killed or imprisoned. If you so much as have the wrong barrel length on your gun, you will go to a federal prison. The difference is that in Mako, while guns are, quote, restricted, if you actually go up to a Macan and say, hey, can you get a gun here? They're like, well, no, guns are restricted. Do you want a gun? I know a guy. And I mean that. That's how it works. They say, well, yeah, there's some gun rules, but if you want a gun, just ask a cop. Here, people are actually rebellious. Here, while there's a federal gun restriction, the militias, instead of worrying about fake concepts of invasion and whether we should build a wall to keep the gringos out, the militias and 3% here actually march in their communities with machine guns in their hands. The militias in the USA don't dare do that because they're too busy obeying the government, getting permits, and saying we have to work within the system. The difference is that in practice, Mako's prison population is 1/4 that of the USA per capita. The difference is that the prisons aren't being filled with people who had the wrong gun. The prisons aren't filled with people who simply tried to defend the rule of law. So are there gun problems in Mako, just like the US? Sure. But are there people willing to disobey? That's the real question. Are the people, do you actually have patriots who love freedom? Because let's not pretend that someone who says, I want to be free, 2A baby, but they want the immigrant to be abused, imprisoned, and molested, contrary to the Constitution, while the new Berlin Wall is built on the border. Let's not pretend those are patriots. Those people have no love for the Constitution or the freedom that our founding fathers stood up for. So yes, the USA has a zillion guns. So what? The people that have those guns are getting those guns so they can go have fun and shoot and sport and fuel their ego. Those people don't actually show up to defend the Constitution, freedom, or their neighbor. In Mako, on the other hand, where on paper the gun restrictions might, to some people, look a little worse, in reality, the people here are far more tenacious. And the Makans, the militias down here, will not hesitate to go arm up and march in the streets and chase the police and the military out of their towns. It happens. It's actually not that uncommon here in Mako. Our courage and our hearts and what we're willing to stand for is everything, not the quantity of our arms. Should a people be armed? Should we exercise and be defiant in the face of laws, fake laws that attempt to restrict the right to protect our family? Absolutely. But in the end, what really matters is, do you defend freedom? Not the patriot freedom that says, I'm a patriot, I wave a flag, I should have freedom, but that guy who I don't like should be in prison because he's in the wrong party, he has the wrong papers, or he's the wrong color. That's not freedom. That's fascism. Do you love your neighbor, and are you willing to defend it? Because a people that are willing to defend freedom can keep the peace. In Mako, the militias versus the government, the people standing up for their rights, it's a growing theme. And most of the time, they don't need to resort to violence because a people that have tenacity and courage and are willing to stand are enough to help push a corrupt government back when they get out of line. That's the truth about gun rights in the USA versus Mako. And I'm tired, as you can see, so I'm going to go You guys can think about that. Maybe share this, spread this, because all these articles, everybody keeps bragging about, look how many guns we have. But you know what? It means nothing, because you don't have the courage to walk out on the street and hold that gun in your hand and tell the police and the government no more.